Welcome. This is Kent Kaufman, CEO of Growth and Leadership Center, and welcome to Leadership Online, our webinar series. Today, we'd like to tell you about one of our topics, which is related to HR plans, how to get them through, how to be strategic, and selling all that to top management, whether it's the CEO or various other functional leaders within the organization. And normally Laura Steck would join me on today's call, but unfortunately she had an engagement that came up and she cannot attend today. So you just get me. But I'm very happy that I've got everyone online, and I hope today's presentation will be helpful to you. We work at all levels in the organization, doing executive coaching, working with teams. And one of the key areas that we find is that HR has the potential of having big impact all across the organization. And the challenge is, how do you actually get on the same wavelength and be able to speak in the terms that will be acceptable and understandable to the other members of the management team, and essentially help you to have bigger and bigger impact in the organization. And we find oftentimes that the way that you get there is by understanding how others think. One of the things that we do encourage in our executive coaching programs is to be sort of self-aware and aware of our impact on others. And so to have impact on others is important for us to understand sort of their point of view. So we'll talk a little bit about that and give you some ideas and areas where hopefully it will be helpful to you. Bear with me for a second while I advance the slide here. There we go. So, our objectives today is to help HR business partners and HR leaders throughout any organization achieve business goals that align with the vision, strategy, and goals of the top management team, which at the top obviously is the CEO, and very important to align around that vision and strategy. And number two here is to contribute by identifying and mapping and pitching and negotiating strategic HR initiatives to support those goals. If you're speaking in terms of the goals of the corporation, you have a much, much better chance of being on the same wavelength. And this, every part of the organization has to take their bits and pieces and translate that down into what they're going to do. And HR is going to be in support of that. And the HR is going to have its own initiatives. And all of that has to combine to map into the overall strategy for the company. So why is this important today? Well, we often talk about being strategic, but oftentimes what we find is that not just HR, but people in general are often weighed down by tactical day-to-day things, and those tactical day-to-day things could be, putting together the latest performance reviews or the next focal, which defines the compensation plan, or working on benefits programs or rollouts. And they all are very time consuming. And there are always a lot of nuances around how you actually roll that out to individuals and questions, et cetera. But if we don't allocate enough time to strategic HR, then you're not actually helping the corporation build strategic competitive advantage. And when you talk about technology companies and companies that we work with, whether they're the Fortune 50, companies like Intel and Cisco and Apple, et cetera, all the way down to startups, you have to build that sustainable competitive advantage. And when we talk about these types of technology companies, people are the key intellectual property. They develop the key intellectual property. And so therefore they are in fact the focus of the corporation. And as a result, HR has a very, very big role to play. The next thing here, trends in general, is that we are supporting global workforces, as you know, especially companies in Silicon Valley may be headquartered here, but they have workforces that span the globe, whether they're in China or India or you know, throughout the world, throughout the Americas. All of these global workforces have the idiosyncrasies of the cultures of those countries, and mapping, of course, the culture of the company against that. Number 3 here, we talked about it, the people help develop the intellectual assets. And so a motivated, engaged workforce is critical for technology companies, and really for any company where the people who are doing the work or delivering the services, how happy they are, how engaged they are, is very, very important to the outcome that the company receives and the customer receives. Number 4 here, driving HR value imperative. There are aspects around being strategic with HR, and we'll talk about some of those areas, or areas that HR has big impact on, can actually add significant value and value for the company through its people. And then number 5 here, staying strategic while dealing with economic uncertainty. What we've seen over the past decade here truly is a wide variety of issues and challenges that are faced on a global, worldwide basis. And those challenges can be that one country or region may be undergoing significant economic recession or economic impact from things like we just had in Europe, which is the exit of Britain from the European Economic Community. And all of these sorts of things have an impact on the people that you work with at the company, and oftentimes with the customer set that you deal with. So we've developed this 5 steps to getting your initiatives through, and we'll talk a little bit about this, but they're pretty straightforward steps, but they're steps that I think each one of them, when you talk about the specifics of whether you're putting through a new initiative around gender neutrality or inclusion, whether it's around unconscious bias, whether it's around new benefits programs, healthcare, etc. You have to identify the needs and map that to the strategy, right? So if our strategy to make this one of the greatest workplaces in the area to work in, we need to identify what it is will make it so. Number 2 then is the selling process, and to actually sell any sort of initiative, you have to put the value and quantify, if you will, the value, not always just in dollars and cents, but also in its impact to the people and the value it will have on the morale or the company culture. Number 3 here, develop a dynamic, solutions-based message materials that help solve the core business needs. And this is about trying to put together materials that speak to the audience. It's may not just be an HR audience that you are trying to convey your initiative to. It's also going to be executive in sales or marketing or an engineering lead. And all of that needs to be done in a way that makes sense for them and for that part of the organization. Number 4, ask penetrating questions to isolate and overcome objections. And this is often done in sales, where you really do try and understand what is the core objection. And sometimes it's budget, but is budget really an objection, or is there some other underlying reason or objection that you need to overcome? Is it reluctance around the idea? Is it reluctance around how it's going to be rolled out or who's going to benefit? And so really understanding not just a budgetary constraint, but if that budgetary constraint wasn't there, what else would maybe get in the way? And that's maybe a good question to phrase or put forward to the executive that you're working with. Then number 5 here, negotiate using the leader's own mindset. Now this is what is often very difficult for us to do, because when we're in our own mindset and we're essentially thinking the way we think, we oftentimes do not think the way the audience thinks. And in this case, the audience could be, an engineering head. So if this engineering head is thinking about projects and deliverables and features and they understand the language of engineering and engineering methodology, they may not quite understand the value proposition as you're proposing it. If you just are speaking about the next benefit that's coming down, or the next compensation plan, or why we can't put together a stock plan, et cetera, et cetera. So these are, again, very important to get on the right wavelength, so that when you actually talk with your customer, with your the supporting or the organization you're supporting, is that you're speaking in a language that they will relate to, understand, and buy into. First step here is, okay, what is it that they need? And so we'll take a couple examples here, and when we do this workshop, oftentimes we spend quite a bit of time around this, but we're going to do it quick today. So, what is it that the CEO needs? And like this quote from Jack Welch, who said, look, HR should be every company's killer app. What could possibly be more important than who gets hired, developed, promoted, or moved out the door? And when we talk about competitive advantage in technology companies, it's not about the computers in the data center. It's really about the people that utilize those computers, create those groundbreaking technologies, those disruptive software programs or hardware developments. And that comes down to the people. And so HR is all about people. So the connection needs to be made. And today's business challenges, these are continuing to become more and more important. We are a knowledge economy, especially in the developed world. And in the developed nations like the US, it is, how do we take best care of our people, right? And how do we attract and retain those people? And so in the context of HR and strategic HR and what the CEO wants the best and the brightest working for the company, compensated well and happy in their roles. So how challenging that is that it's a very competitive market, very competitive environment. There's global challenges, whether you're working here in the US or whether you're working through groups in Asia or South America, etc. There are several new technologies, and technology is always moving, inflection points, and that means a lot of change in the organization, whether you're going from a typical enterprise software to a cloud-based system, whether you're going from a regional workforce to a global workforce. All of these types of changes and inflection points are happening all the time. And new technology like Internet of Things is constantly coming to the forefront. And the ability for people to work and where they work, and the flexibility of the work environment, whether they're working at home, whether they're doing it from their cell phone at the gym, or whether they're locked in their office or at a Starbucks. So that's the reality of the world today, and the agility of the HR team to actually be able to operate in that in a very compressed time frame is critical. And that's, again, what is it that the CEO wants? The CEO wants that next level, that next great working environment that's going to challenge and get the most out of the people in the organization. And so when we look at what CEOs are looking for, asking for, we often turn to surveys, and I'll show you one in a minute. But these are typical questions that a CEO cares about. Do we have adequate leadership capacity to harness global opportunities? We talk about bench strength and leadership pipeline, but what does that mean at each level in the organization? Where do we have a deep bench, and where are we a little short? How do we keep the deep bench motivated and happy when our company maybe doesn't have slots for them? How do we keep them challenged? Are we still entrepreneurial and nimble? And that's a question that oftentimes gets asked in Silicon Valley companies is, are we becoming too locked into our thinking? Do we need to get outside of our box? And how do we do that? And again, the CEO is pushing for that. And this is all about human capital. And so, again, the HR team, how they engage on this at a strategic level is really, really important and a great opportunity for everyone in the audience. Number 3 here, are we harnessing synergies across multiple cultural and global teams? And it's hard to get your team together all in one place at one time. Maybe you can pull that off once a year, or maybe subgroups are able to get together. But how do you do that on a global basis? And how do you keep that consistent across an engineering team, half in China, half in the U.S., or a third in India and another third in South America, and a headquarters in the U.S. And so all of those cultures are going to have to mesh when it comes to delivering on products, and what tools and resources are needed, and what type of engagement, and what can HR do to help with these remote and global teams, and how do we make that the best operating environment that we can, and what tools do we need combined with what types of individuals do we need to lead these or parts of the organization. All of these are priorities. Do we have a connected company culture? We clearly have different country cultures, but how do we connect the company culture across all these regions? And that, I think, is an ongoing challenge. And how do we fold those regions in, and how does HR help make that happen? How do we raise our company's insight quotient, which is, how do we raise our own bar? I think all of these are valid areas that the CEOs are asking. Now, when we talk about communicating, this is always sort of an individual and in one-on-one communications, but also in group communications. What type of message are we trying to deliver? Are we do we need to be super assertive? Do we need to be low assertive? Do we need high expressiveness or low expressiveness? Am I talking to a spirited group of salespeople that I want to really motivate, have them go out and attack the market in certain ways? I may communicate in a certain way. For others, maybe an engineering organization, if we're trying to figure out a new way to develop software using an agile process that takes advantage of speed, I may be thinking about asking a little bit more and reducing the expressiveness so that the tension does not get out of hand. Maybe I have to be a little more systematic about that. So these are ideas for how you might have to communicate across those regions and areas. CFO, what does the CFO care about? Okay, shifting parts of the organization. CEO has this big vision for the corporation, and now we've got to actually operate with the different functions within the company. And oftentimes, strategic projects for HR are going to cost money, whether it's a new compensation program, or whether it's an offsite or some tangible thing that we want to deliver to the employees. Oftentimes we have to run that through the CFO. And so what do they typically think about and talk about? Well, they talk about return on investment, right, and financial measures. But they also care about supporting the CEO and the board. So with a truly strategic CFO, they actually understand why you may want to do this. And some may be more receptive than others to the conversation. But at the end of the day, you may have to actually quantify in the terms of what is the return for us? What do we think we're going to get out of this? We're going to spend $1 million. What do we think we're going to get out of this? Well, it's going to make our people happier, more effective. We think we're going to boost our morale rating, or potentially efficiencies, etc. We go from a HR business partner centric model to a more hub model where the HR transactional functions are moved to a centralized business unit. These are all questions to be asked by the CFO, and you have to be prepared to be able to actually have a conversation around it and be able to speak their language. When we talk about top management, they're going to have their own pieces of the strategy. Let's say if we're talking about engineering or marketing, they may have a strategy or a product strategy or go-to-market strategy that requires a support. Maybe it's a staffing activity. We need to staff up for a particular technology that we need to produce a product around, or we need to shift some of our workforce from a U.S.-centric workforce to a global workforce. These are strategic initiatives that HR is going to be integrally part of. But you've got to be able to actually map into why we are doing this and be able to relate to specifically the strategy and the execution plan that the head of engineering or the head of marketing or the head of finance, etc., may be working on. So one of the key aspects of actually supporting the corporate strategy is actually figuring out how you fit into the functional strategy. So, how do people play a role in this? Are there needs for rapid onboarding of a large number of new hires? Or if we're integrating an acquisition, and this acquisition has to interface and meld into the corporation, how are we going to do that? And HR then becomes very critical to that strategic initiative. And putting, again, the context of building a return on investment. So if we're going to accomplish, one of these strategies, whether it's, moving of work or, hiring on of talent, it's important then to integrate into that. Okay. So, we don't really have time today because we're going to try and make sure that we get you out on time. We would ask this question. I think we're going to go till about 3:15. What areas are current focus? And these are typical, what I would call areas, strategic areas that you may have work in, whether it's learning and development, organizational effectiveness, compensation, benefits, staffing, legal, regulatory, and operational effectiveness. All of these for you in HR are touch points. And certainly if you're an executive in the organization, you have to think about these as well. And so this is where we talk about business partners. This is the melding these are the areas that management in the functional roles like engineering, software and sales and etc. That's where they integrate with HR. So these are the typical strategic areas and initiatives, examples of initiatives that go into each of those. So, this is a survey from a while ago, but one of the things that we often suggest and recommend and sometimes put together surveys for are when we are doing a needs analysis, sometimes it's worthwhile running an actual survey. And this can be a written survey with relevant critical questions as they relate to our company, our organization, combined with some interviews, which give us more color with key leaders and key individual contributors within the organization. We compile that data, analyze it, share, discuss, benchmark it externally. And once we do that, then we're able to better fit with the needs of the organization that we're supporting. So an example, is it improve or leverage talent, or is it cost control or customer relationships or operational efficiencies? What is important to the organization now? And whether you do an employee survey or whether you do a needs analysis survey that we suggest here for supporting as a business partner, the idea is that once you uncover those needs, then that will help inform the strategies and the importance and the return on investment of the strategies that you're trying to push out in the organization. And again, the CEOs, we love to look at this survey every year that PricewaterhouseCoopers does. But an example is back when the recession hit, the CEOs wanted, if you will, better and more support from HR, and HR I think responded over the past many years here to do that. And so it's important to keep track of what the CEOs are thinking. So this is the 19th global survey. And some of what I would call areas where HR becomes important come in this availability of key skills. That's 72% felt that was really important. Obviously there's over-regulation in geopolitics and exchange rate and what I would call the global forces. But once you get past the global forces, what is it that CEOs care about? Well, top of the list is people within their organization, and the ability of that skill set that's inside and how to keep growing and developing that. And what we find is that learning and development, and we do a lot of executive coaching with organizations, which is part of the development of top executives, is critical to building skills. And it's not an area that is simple to do. And because people are busy, oftentimes we don't allocate the time and resources to actually getting their skill level up. And so this is a highlight of this survey, this year's survey. Again, availability of those key skills. 65% felt social instability, and this actually goes back to this cultural question of, we're facing particular regions that are undergoing turmoil, and oftentimes we will have remote locations that are impacted by that, and so that instability, if you will, in a the storm outside of the office is sometimes something that our HR teams have to deal with, whether it's has to do with geopolitics or whether it's unions and labor issues in Europe. All of these are constant areas of concern for CEOs, and a very clear area that strategic initiatives and strategic activities need to be in place or put in place through HR. Shift in consumer, which is also a shift in the workforce, the millennials and how we're accommodating, or the workforce and the work-life balance and the implications to the corporate environment. And then this lack of trust, and in the context of any corporation, is how to build trust between management and the rank and file. And that is a very important ingredient to the success of companies such as those here in Silicon Valley, is building that high trust level. So moving a little bit, down our 5 steps here, sell competitive value proposition. Again, back to this, once I'm able to articulate that there's going to be return for the efforts that we're making, and it's important to understand that value chain and where HR fits in there, right? So when you talk about whether it's IA, R&D, ops, marketing, sales, people and teams are constantly being challenged. And so HR is, in a sense, advocating for the people in each of these organizations and these teams. And all of that then, finds its way into whether it's idea creation, product development, operations, marketing and sales, and financial returns. All of that value chain spans people, and HR has the opportunity to add value at every step through the people and through the organizational enablement that they provide. Now, there's a good book out there which we often recommend that people read. It's by Brian Becker. Talks about how to build a strategic HR roadmap, and this chart kind of gives you an idea of how to do that. And first, on the left here, what you'll see is that we have corporate strategies, internal process and perspectives, the organizational excellence mindset. You have the customer perspective and the financial perspective. And one of the things we love to do when we actually do workshops around this particular area is to take each organization and ask them these questions. Have you viewed this initiative from the lens of the financial perspective? Have you viewed how the customer would perceive this, either the value, etc.? And from internal perspective, how is this going to make our work-life balance better, or how is this going to make people more engaged? And on the corporate level, how are we doing against those skill sets enhancements that those CEOs that we talked about in the 19th global survey of CEOs? How is that going to be affected, and how are we pushing leadership development or employee development? What's important around this mind map here, and we won't have time to spend going through each level here, is that each one of these are related in some ways to how you should think about strategic areas for HR. So if I am supporting, let's say, the product development people, what is it about the people in the organization, either the skill sets or their operational excellence, their capabilities, or a global workforce, or the ability to communicate, or how to work in cross-functional teams, or how to handle conflict within the organization? How do you fit yourself in with the strategy around products that, or services that this part of the organization is expected to deliver against, because you can be an integral part of the solution. Okay. Things like leadership development. How, if we need to develop sales leaders, what is that? How does that translate to the customer perspective? How do we help sales and enable sales? How do we help measure or think about customer satisfaction? Do we have insights into how our team is interfacing, right? And then all that's going to play into helping to drive earnings, which increase the shareholder value. We of course get market rewards, and guess what? That ties back to compensation strategy, right? So they're interrelated, and these things support each other. And HR is the fabric by which we do that. And the opportunity here is, how do we incorporate people and thinking about people into this entire strategy and map that strategy into the corporation? So think about this when you get your next request from your CEO of how you might map in. This is a case study. GTE had done a mind map around this, and I won't go into it, but if you look at it, each one of these areas is a big contributor. Whether it's talent or capability of competencies, enablement of performance-based performance culture. How do you produce a performance culture? Organizational integration, leadership. All of them, working their way up to that ultimate contribute to the corporate shareholder value, right? And employees on one side, and maybe corporate and business unit on the other, as it relates to each of these areas. So, if you're interested, we can get these slides to you, and you can study this. And again, opportunity to read that in Brian Becker's book. From that, hold on one second. Okay, sorry, had a little trouble with the slide there. Okay, so we've developed this 10 steps to develop an HR strategic partnership. And these 10 steps are guaranteed to help you generate a path into each of the areas that you support. Okay, and I won't go through the details of it, but there's 4 steps that have to do with strategizing, right? Embracing that company vision and building a business case. The next phase is really around analyzing, right? And then motivating, and then ultimately in execution. And so for strategic HR, actually building a strategy is going to encompass from A to Z these 10 steps. And ultimately coming up with this implementation plan, whether it's a new rollout of compensation program, whether it's a rollout of a learning and development program, etc., and then reviewing that, measuring it, etc. So this again be available to you if you're interested. We can mail it to you. Step 3 is develop this message-based materials, and you have to ask these questions, right? Is this a business need, a performance need, or a work environment and capabilities need? So oftentimes when you're talking to an executive and they're asking for your help and support, is it the effort that you're going to put forward, or the ideas that you're implicating in a solution? Are they solving a business need? Is there a performance problem? that has to be addressed within the organization or within a team or within an individual? Or is it about building work environment or work capability, better cross-functional teams or support of better communication or building a better work environment, culture, etc.? And then how do I get access? Oftentimes we're faced with this issue of I can't get in to see my top executive, right? And so there's this access issue. Or, I haven't really got to know my executive, and, it's hard for me to have strategic impact because I haven't quite got the credibility piece yet. And then, well, do they trust my judgment, right? And so all of these are kind of this underlying piece that you have to build. And part of that is built by understanding what their needs are, how they think, and how they communicate. So if I'm an engineering leader or a product person, it would be very important for me to understand that my HR support structure understood my problem, could understand what my product rollout looks like, what the timeline might look like. Or if I'm supporting sales, what motivates my team? How do I keep them engaged? Or is their morale high? How are we trying to, generate a compensation plan, et cetera? So these are areas that when you engage with the top leader in your part of the organization, understanding and being able to speak the same language is critically important in order to build that trust and that credibility, which ultimately will result in good access. Number 4 here around the sort of the understanding, those penetrating questions: who, what, when, where, how, and especially why. Overcoming objections and criteria, which is really very similar to sales, is that what is the underlying concern? Is it cost, or is it something else? Well, I don't really think this is going to be effective. Okay, well, why do you feel that way? Well, I don't know. Well, let's unlayer it. If you had a better measurement around the return on investment of this skills development program, would that make you more comfortable? Yeah, it would probably make me more comfortable, right? So these are, again, what is underlying? Is it that we haven't come up with the right plan? Is it that it's cost too much? Is it because we haven't found a measurement that we're gonna use? Is it that that they don't think it's innovative enough? What is it around the objection? So we ask that you ask those penetrating questions. When we talk about change management, and I'll finish up here in just a moment. When we talk about change management, find a shared need, shape the vision, lead with change, mobilize commitment, build it, enable systems, monitor, and then make it last. And so this is, again, when we're pushing through a new initiative, it's not just the idea. It's not just the rollout of the initial program. It's the ongoing, it's the support, it's the continuous improvement, all of that as we play it out through the life of the strategic initiative or the program that we're doing. And number 5 here is about negotiating with the other's mindset. And we teach a whole session on negotiation, but there's a big upfront piece when you negotiate, which is around planning and understanding what are the interests of the group that I'm supporting here. There's this bargaining phase. Well, how do we do it? What's a good value proposition? How much do we want to spend? Do we want to do it in a pilot program before we do the big one? All these types of questions around the bargaining phase. And then, okay, this is what we're agreed to. Now, how do we actually go about and maintain the accountability for success of this project? We give you this little form but it's actually really helpful, is actually think about, okay, let me write down if I have a new change of benefits, or if I have a hiring plan or a training part of the plan. Well, what is it, the vision that I'm trying to get there, and the objectives and so on. And for HR, it's keeping all this in mind. This is the hierarchy of accountability: alignment with strategic goals, effective HR programs, efficient HR programs, and then the compliance piece. And developing a scorecard which is actually relevant to your part of the organization. It's not just some dashboard you load up from Workday or your latest software package, but you've actually thought about what is it, the leading and lagging indicator that is going to tell me whether I'm going to be successful or not around financial impact, the customer that I'm supporting, or customer that the company is supporting, the operational part of the organization, and sort of the overall strategic HR aspects. So in summary, align your HR strategy and tactics with the organizational goals. The strategic business partner's goal should be around having big strategic impact. Do your work and your homework influence before you need to. That's something that I personally have found to be extremely helpful. It's not going and asking for a favor when you need it. It's going to ask a friend or someone that you've established a very strong, trusting relationship with, that you then may need their support. Okay? Plan your campaigns, negotiate a win-win, and build your measurement system. And at the end, we always encourage everyone to take a little time to celebrate your success and your success along the way. With that, thank you for attending, and I will ask anyone who wants to get a copy of this to go ahead and email us. And if you have any questions, you can reach us at the office or over email. And if you're interested in other topics for our leadership series and webinars, feel free to email us with some suggestions as well. And we hope to see you out there in at our clients. And you can reach me on LinkedIn or Laura as well. So with that, I'd like to say goodbye and thank you for attending.